A young man accidentally dropped a piece of instant noodles into a sand table. The next moment, a thick piece of instant noodles, as large as a pillar, fell onto an ancient altar. The empress, who was conducting a ritual to the heavens, was very confused. She thought it was the result of her prayer to the heavens, but she didn't know that the food was just a piece of instant noodle debris dropped by the young man. The young man was originally a general in the ancient times. He was killed by spies from an enemy nation. By chance, he traveled through time and arrived in the modern world 2,000 years later. He had to learn to adapt to modern life, living in a cheap rental apartment and eating instant noodles every day. One day, an anonymous delivery arrived at his door. When he uncovered the cover, he found a sand table inside. He recognized that the sand table represented his ancient kingdom. With a magnifying glass, he could see everything happening in the country, including the empress bathing clearly. Since the empress ascended the throne, the entire country had been suffering from a famine. The marquis, who coveted the throne, took the opportunity to force the empress to abdicate. Even the empress dowager threatened her that if the people didn't have enough food after this ritual, she would have to abdicate voluntarily. The ministers discussed that if the general were still alive, he would never allow the empress to suffer from the pressure of corrupt officials. Watching the empress being humiliated from the modern world, the young man angrily squeezed the instant noodles in his hand, unintentionally dropping the residue into the sand table. It happened to fall in the center of the altar. Looking at the thick food falling from the sky, everyone exclaimed that it was a gift from the heavens. Seeing this, the empress was overjoyed, immediately boiling the noodle and sharing it with everyone to taste. The ministers all praised it. However, the marquis believed this was just a trick by the empress. At the same time, the young man, knowing that the empress was performing this ritual to resolve the famine, immediately poured an entire box of instant noodles into the sand table. The next moment, a large bag of instant noodles fell onto the altar, and the royal granary was already full. Upon hearing this good news, the empress was overjoyed, thinking that with these foods, the people would be able to survive the winter. But unexpectedly, the enemy army suddenly attacked. The empress personally led the troops on the city wall to command the battle, but the enemy had already cut off reinforcements and supplies. If they didn't retreat soon, they might die there. As a former general, the young man knew well that the enemy's weapons were advanced, so he immediately went out to purchase equipment to help the empress. Seeing that the enemy army was about to break into the city, he pulled out a flamethrower and aimed it at the enemy soldiers in the sand table. Soon, the enemy soldiers were too scared to continue attacking the city. Then he threw fireworks and firecrackers at the enemy army, and the battlefield instantly became chaotic. The enemy commander thought it was the empress using sorcery, and immediately ordered a retreat. Little did they know, it was all the young man helping from behind the scenes. The empress, learning that heavenly fire had repelled the enemy, speculated that it was the general's soul in the heavens helping them, so she led the ministers to honor the general's memory. She had just placed the general's battle uniform onto the altar, when the young man suddenly sneezed, and a gust of wind blew his helmet into the copper cauldron. The helmet was instantly transported to his rental apartment 2,000 years later.